Good evening, everyone. At the outset, I'd like to thank UGC for having initiated this lecture series of celebrating 75 years of India's independence. Because yes, we all are a generation who probably somewhere losing touch with the idea of the struggle that the freedom fighters have gone through, and because of whom we are living in an independent country. So I really am grateful to them for having initiated this idea of having this lecture series. I'm also grateful to the Indian Council of Historical Research. It's the apex research body for history in India, for having come up with this monograph that you can see on the left, which is called India, the Mother of Democracy. This is also taking you back into every ancient, medieval, modern Indian source to say how India has always had democratic traditions being implemented in India for a very long time. And with reference to that, I'm going to have my talk on continuation of the Panchayat system by the British in Maharashtra, a democratic approach to justice in the transition years. I take this opportunity to also thank the VC and the Registrar of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics for having invited me here for this public lecture and giving me this opportunity to present my ideas based on the original primary unpublished notices of the English administrators who've written the entire system and presented to their own government factory. So I go ahead. Now we all know we are in the region of Maharashtra. I think some of you probably have come from outside Maharashtra to study at this institute. And when we talk about the region of Maharashtra, it's very significant because in the region of Maharashtra, right since the 17th century, it has a very rich cultural historical tradition. We've all heard of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and his vision of Swarajya, which he really took up at a very young age, and he accomplished it at a young age. And it is with that he created his group of leaders as well, who would continue this tradition even after he moved on. Right? So it was almost for 2 centuries that you have that Maharashtra was kept independent by these leaders of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, including his prime ministers, the Peshwas of Maharashtra. Now, this continues till about the early 19th century, that is about 1880, when you have the Peshwa Bajirao II, the last Peshwa. He surrendered to the British in the Third Anglo-Maratha War. Now, when we go to the Third Anglo-Maratha War and the last Peshwa Bajirao II, it was a very trying and testing period, because it was this time that this entire region was quite shaken up with the fact as to how the policies have not been very good of the last Peshwa and how we are really looking forward to some change. And that is when the British take over finally in 1818. It is a very crucial period for both the people who've been now, who are now going to be rather governed by the British. And at the same time, you have the British officers who are very daunted by the task that, okay, now they're going to have to rule a subject people who have always been independent. Now, when we say always, 150 years of independence is like a really long time. So independence is all that the subject people have known, when the rest of the country has always been under some or the other Muslim ruler. Right? Now, with that in mind, the Britishers decided that this transition period is going to be very important. Transition from what? Transition from the Maratha rule into the British rule. In other words, from an independent rule to a foreign rule. And therefore, this time period of 1818 to the next few years, if we would take about another 10 years, is very significant for the Britishers to prove that what they are here for is not to exploit the people, but they are really wanting to bring about a smooth transitioning of this handover of the rule, and also that we're willing to bring in policies which will benefit the people. They wanted to cushion their rule in such a way that the people are not troubled by the policies that they bring in. So it is like, if you want good governance, you have to take the people with you in governance so that they are happy with what you are doing for them. With this, the British decided to come up with a very unique experiment that they were going to try. And that unique experiment was going to be forming an autonomous body which is going to rule over this region of the Deccan. And that autonomous body was called as the Deccan Commissionerate. So this region, they call it the Maratha country. A Deccan commissioner is appointed here, who's Mount Stuart Elphinstone, and he's been the resident at Pune during Peshwa Bajirao II's time period. And why was he chosen was because he was very comfortable, accustomed to the life of the people here, the customs of this land, and they felt he was the right person to be the mediator between the British government and the subject people to bring out the best of this land for both of them. Right? And with this, they appointed Mount Stuart Elphinstone, and they formed what are known as collectorates. So this region, this Maratha country, this principality was going to be very large, and therefore they divided it into 4 collectorates. Pune was the primary one. You have Ahmednagar, Khandesh, and Dharwad. Now, when these collectors were appointed in these collectorates, the British government instructed these collectors that they must keep the primary objectives of the British in mind while they are administering this region. Now, what are the primary objectives of the British? First and foremost, to pay attention towards the protection and conciliation of the people. So we are going to protect the people, protect the interests of the people, and conciliate them into agreeing to our rule. Secondly, it was going to make no attempts at innovation. Now, if talking about innovation, that means you're not going to bring about any change as far as possible into the culture, into the customs, into the life that the people of this region have been used to. So there's no going to be sudden shift or a sudden change in their life that the people will find it difficult to accept. And the third was going to be to make an effort to convey to the people that they should not expect any change except better administration. So if we are going to change anything, let us understand it's going to be for better administration so that you all benefit at large. That is the only change that they would bring about. Now, when we talked about these things, they said that the revenue settlement has to be done because we are finally a foreign power. We are going to be here. We are going to want to get money out of this. Yes. We are going to look at the administrative settlement. We are going to make changes as far as administration is concerned. But at the same time, something very, very important for them was the judicial administration or the judicial settlement of these territories. Because Elphinstone, he stated that if the people have to be impressed with a new government's sense of justice, it is very important that you make them feel that they are going to be impartial, they are going to be good, and they are going to be fair in every possible manner. This quotation is something that I put up. He says, I quote, any government sense of justice impresses upon the minds of its subjects of how good, impartial, just, and effective their rule was to be. So it's only with these things that so it's like with the justice system, the people will realize whether this government is going to be a good government or not. And with this, they stated the sole functions of a government. Now they said that of course administration of justice is very important, maintenance of law and order is very important, and at the same time, the collection of revenue is important. But to top it all, the most important duties amongst all these functions is the legal system and the administration of justice. So we can at a point overlook the collection of revenue, but we can probably overlook how the administrative setup is to be done. But what we cannot ever overlook is the legal system that we are going to maintain in this country and how we are going to administer justice. And with this in mind, Elphinstone, he said we have 2 options in front of us. One, what we do is we implement the British system of justice in an Indian setting. Now, what was this British system of justice? Everything all the laws put down, everything in place, working for centuries together in order. And on the other hand, what we can do is continue this native system of judiciary that exists, that has been existing under the Marathas, which has been an age-old institution and a time-tested institution. Now, if this institution has been under the Marathas for more than 100 years, it definitely is something that is benefiting the people, right? And with this understanding, he decided to move on with the next option, that is the second option. But like I mentioned earlier, the directions that were given that we are not going to make any innovation. So right in the beginning, they have made it very clear that the British government is going to follow a policy of no innovation. So we are not going to bring about any changes in the system of the people of this land. We are not keen on interfering with the customs of the country and make the people unhappy in the process. Now, why do you think they could have taken such a step? Firstly, if they have to interfere in the customs, let's say, what is important for them is they need to understand what these customs are, right? And secondly, if they interfere in the traditional law of the Marathas, there is a huge possibility that they could antagonize the people against their will. And this was something that they were not willing to risk. And with that in mind, they rather said that we have a look at what the system is, let's understand what the customs that they are following, rather than interfere with those customs. And it was with this, they said that, okay, let's dig in to see what was the justice under the Marathas like. Now, when we started looking at the system under the Marathas, they saw that the system of justice was very simple. It was very suitable to the times that it was conducted in. They did not prefer to be legally precise. If you have to look at an ideal setup of legal system of justice, they say you have to be very precise as to, okay, XYZ documents are required. If you come up with this, you can file a case or you cannot. More than that, they prefer that they must have an amicable settlement of justice. So whenever a dispute occurs, that should be amicably resolved, wherein you're giving the suitor, the disputants, a chance to prove his case, right? And if they fail in an amicable settlement, only then do you look at using the formal instruments of justice, which is then you go into the formal setup of the judiciary system and start proceeding with your case. Now, again, the justice under the Marathas, when Shivaji Maharaj came to power, next slide. Not So when Shivaji Maharaj coronated himself in 1674, he formalized the judicial system and he brought in what is known as the Raj Mandal. Now, what is the Raj Mandal? The Raj Mandal was the king and his council of ministers, what is known as the Ashtapradhan Mandal, wherein his council was going to look after the administration as well as the justice to be given to the people. Along with this, he came up with what is known as the Huzur Hazir Majlis. Now, this was a central judicial assembly. Huzur Hazir, basically Huzur referring to the king, Hazir him being present. So, a body during which the king himself is present to decide on the cases at hand. Now, the Huzur Hazir Majlis generally dealt with cases which were of very high importance. Now, when we say high importance, it does not necessarily mean of important people. It means the depth or the intensity of the case at hand would be the deciding factor for the king to be present or not. It could be the complication in as far as the evidences are concerned. It could be the intricacies of the witnesses that are concerned. It could be any of these factors which would decide whether the king's presence is required or not. Right? Otherwise, the king generally referred the cases to the Gothas or the Goth Sabha, which was generally the local indigenous officers who assembled to discuss the local problems. And then you had a local system of trial, what was called as the trial by the Majlis, which was generally continued. Now, what happens in this trial by the Majlis? When we study the trial by Majlis, we see democratic elements in this system. Now, both the plaintiff and the defendant, they were given the opportunity to present their side of the case. There was no pressure put on either side of the disputants to make their presentation in a particular manner. They were free in expressing what was their problem. And the Majlis would carefully examine the evidence which was produced by both the parties. They would take their time to arrive at a decision. They would deliver the judgment after all possible deliberations. So a lot of discussion, deliberations was undertaken to come to a decision as to what has been presented to us and what is the argument being made by both the disputing parties. And with that, they came up with what was known as a document called as the Mahazan. Next slide. So what was there in this Mahazan? It contained the statements of both the parties. It contained the evidence which was produced by them to prove their case. It had the accounts of the witnesses. All the relevant discussions which the Majlis would have, the members of the Majlis would have, the opinions, all of this was recorded in the Majlis. And finally, what was the decision that they arrived at based on the documents that had been produced to them? All of that was put together and recorded in the Mahazan. In short, if you look at it, it was a very clear case of transparency being maintained when a case was to be resolved, wherein both the parties submitted what they wanted to submit, the evidences, the accounts of witnesses, so this was recorded, which becomes a very important and crucial feature of democracy. We always say when we talk about democracy, along with people's participation, having a transparent government is something which is important. And that is what we see in this particular document. Now, by the time you come to the 1730s, we see that the trial by Panchayat is something which is taking more importance. And the trial by Majlis is slowly falling into disuse. Wherein now, the Panchayat, the 5 respectable members, elderly people of the village or the community are coming together and are going to perform a similar role that was being done by the Majlis. Because it was a time-tested institution, the British felt that it made more sense to decide on continuing this system under their rule as well, because it had worked very well under the Marathas. Next slide. Now, what happens in this trial by Panchayat? Again, this has been studied by the British officers themselves, and they have recorded and structured the way in this Panchayat was followed. First and foremost, you have what is known as the forum. So what is this forum? Okay, if a complaint has to be made, where does the complainant make his complaint? Temporarily, the complainant could choose where he wanted to make the complaint. It was preferred rather that he would make it at the place where he lived, where he resided. So the local officers who knew him, they would record his complaint and accept his complaint. The other option was that if he preferred to have it in any other place, he was given the freedom to have it there. It could be based on whether the other disputing party resided in another village, or the dispute over which it was being the complaint was being raised was in another region. So keeping these in mind, he had the choice to decide where he wanted to come up with his or register his complaint. The second is about the composition of the members. Now, like I've already mentioned, we all know the Panch given very great importance even in today's day and age. You have the 5 elderly, respectable men who are appointed to be the panchayat members. They are supposed to be, in fact, not supposed to be, they are generally the ones who are unbiased and they have no personal interest in the case at hand. So these are the people who were generally chosen because when the British officer, so you have the collector of Pune and his assistant was Langston, and he was asked to make a report of the way in which the panchayat was conducted in this under the Marathas. So he has recorded and said that generally the people who are the arbitrators, they were men of property. So those members would have no interest in that property would automatically become the chosen ones to be the members of the panchayat. When we look at the working of the panchayat system, I can just mention some time back, the way the majlis followed, the same pattern was followed by the panchayat. The complainant would register his complaint. He would produce all the evidences that he had regarding his complaint. The accounts of witnesses were brought out. They were recorded. The arguments were put forth, and the members would then discuss, deliberate, and come to a decision. Now, whatever decision we came up with, all of that was recorded in what was known as a saransh, that is a summary. And in that summary, that was not the final decision, remember. That saransh was then presented to the Peshwa at Pune, or through, of course, that is through the local officer appointed, and then it was formalized as a judgment. And a new document was produced, which was known as a Nivada Patra, wherein the Peshwa, that means the government, is endorsing the judgment that has been passed by the panchayat. Now, why this check was there? Because they had to ensure that the panchayat members have not been corrupt, they have not been irrational in giving their judgment or coming to a decision. So as a measure of balancing and checking the panchayat members, this saransh was submitted through the local officers to the Peshwa Pune, and then a formal decision, the judgment was passed, which was known as the Nivada Patra. Now, once this was done, you also had a chief justice in those days. And suppose if the Peshwa felt, or even if the disputing parties, they felt that the judgment given was not right and they had not been using the right deliberation while making their judgment, they could appeal for a new panchayat. And at that time, the Peshwa would request the Chief Justice to look into the matter to see what was the incorrect measures that were used for giving this judgment by the panchayat, and if required, he had the authority to appoint a new panchayat for the same case. Right? Now, when we look at all of this, one wonders how much time this all would have taken. We all know even today, when it comes to the law courts, we all say never enter the only if you have the time and the money should ever step into the law courts. But when one looks at that time, one realizes that the time required for executing the decisions made by the panchayat was very little. It was a very speedy redressal system and a very cheap redressal system. They say that if cases were up to a few hundreds of rupees, they would be solved in a month or two. If it was above 5,000, it would take about 6 months. And in very, very rare cases, it went to about a year or two. Sometimes, if there were litigations of land, or there were boundary disputes, or inheritance issues, then in those cases also, though it would get resolved in about 2 to 5 years, there are very rare cases which have gone beyond 10 years. So one really looks at it and understands that yes, if we say 10 years is a long time, but if we realize today it takes a lifetime sometimes to have certain cases resolved, right? So keeping that in mind, one says it was a very quick and a speedy way of dispensing justice. Coming to the execution of the decision. Now, once the decision was given, it went to the local officers of the place where the case was registered, and it was in his hands to ensure that the judgment given in the Diwar Patra was implemented. So the execution was in the hands of the local officers. And finally coming, yes, to the appeals. One wonders what happens. Were there appeals made? Were appeals allowed? So yes, appeals were allowed. Like I just mentioned, if they were unhappy with the decision for any reason, they could make appeals. If required, the Chief Justice would intervene and he would decide and appoint a new panchayat. If people were happy with the decision, no appeals were required, it would immediately go into the execution part. And finally, coming to the court fees, there were no formal court fees provided or given to the panchayat members. If at all, the panchayat members had been inconvenienced with some or the other way, probably he had to come a long way to, give this decision, or he had to come too often to be a part of this dispute. Only in that case, it was out of the winning party's discretion or choice that they would decide to give him symbols of honor. That was not always the case, and those symbols of honor were what? You give them either what was called as a shela or a pagoda. That means either a shawl or a turban. That was the only thing, and that was very important because that was a symbol of honor and respect that the panchayat member had earned as being a part of the panchayat member, the punishment in that particular case. Now, with all of this, we need to see what was the working of the panchayat under the British. Now, in the second region, the British decided that if we want to continue and go with the second option of this time-tested institution, we must first find out in detail as to how the system was followed. And in spite of all this information that they had, they came up with a detailed questionnaire which was circulated to the collectors, which had about 70 plus questions relating to the system of justice that was followed under the Marathas. And it was these answers that they gathered which becomes primary sources for us to study the way in which the system was under the Marathas, and if any changes were made by the British, what were they? Just a few sample questions for you on the screen. I'll quickly read it up. How was justice administered under the Peshwa's government? Were particular cases tried by officers of the government, and certain cases referred to panchayat, so there a distinction being made? How were the panchayats constituted? Who are the members who are eligible to sit on it? How were the members elected or appointed? What was their award? How was it drawn out? Did it give reasons for the decision that they were giving? Where was the written award deposited? Was it recorded anywhere? And what is the public feeling regarding panchayat? Now, this was a very important question for them. That if the people themselves are not happy with the system, definitely they had every reason to bring about a change. So here again, it shows us that how they were not wanting to make any change, any innovation in the already existing system by antagonizing the people. If the people are happy with what has been followed, they were more than willing to continue. Right? So what came across once the next slide, please. Sorry. So what came across through the British study was a detailed way in which they realized that the way the panchayat followed was very easy to follow, and the people were very happy with it. And therefore, they said that all the suits were to be referred to these tribunals, that is the panchayats, whose decisions were going to be final, except where they find two things, either corruption or gross partiality. Only in these two cases were they going to move into a more formal instrument of justice rather than sticking to what the panchayat members had decided on. The decisions which I just mentioned were not to be considered where the judgment was not just. So when one realizes that the judgment that was given is unfair, it was not to be implemented or executed. Right? So they were very clear on that. An appeal again was allowed to either party in all the cases, If an appeal was being made, the collectors were instructed to examine the proceedings of the panchayat, and then based on that, they were going to initiate further inquiries. If no appeal was going to be made by either of the parties, they were going to enforce the decision that the panchayat had brought up. And to prevent any delay in execution of the awards, the commissioner declared that he will not receive appeals. Because the moment the people know that the commissioner is going to receive appeals, it is going to unnecessarily encourage people to go and make appeals just to delay the implementation of the judgment given by the panchayat members. So he said he will interfere only if it was necessary to ascertain that the panchayat members had violated on the general rules that were put in place, and only then he will look into it. With this, they realized that, okay, we are going ahead with what the existing system is. Definitely, it has its advantages, and also there are certain defects which we must improve. So remember the earlier statement that I had made, that all they wanted to do was that if we bring about any change, it will only be a better administration of this region, nothing to go against the feelings of the people. And the advantages they brought out were that they multiplied the chances of a just award. So it multiplied the chances that everyone was going to have a fair system of redressal. Secondly, it submitted a case to the test of able men who, with their experience, could understand the nuances of any case. So when you're taking the local people, they know and understand the system, the people, the situation, the evidences better than anyone else. And with their experience, they're going to make it better. Right? The indigenous people who were to investigate the case, they were more capable of assigning due weight to the evidence of their own countrymen. The Europeans might not be able to do so. So they also thought that, should we put up Europeans over these panchayat members, or one of the members should be a European, so a British officer who's going to overlook the judgment? He says they are not in a position to understand these nuances. So having a European there is also not going to help in any way. And in fact, later they also state, I will be mentioning that they said that when you appoint a judge, the judge, let it be there, but he should appoint a native jury. That means the panchayat members. Let them decide, even if he's not in he's not in sync with the decision of the panchayat members, still his decision will not be followed. The European judges, what the panchayat members are saying, that should be followed because they understand it better. Right? So that also shows that how they were willing to accept what was the best of this system and take it forward. Right? And lastly, they said it was an all-inclusive system. Because when we say all-inclusive, another feature of democracy, that you take everyone with you in the system. So they said whenever a case comes up, one has to ensure that members of all the castes get represented in that membership. Because if you choose only the members of the prisoner's caste, what is the danger? The danger is obviously they might give the case in favor of the prisoner. Secondly, suppose if an appeal is being made against that decision and there needs to be a change that needs to be brought in, the people will not be more accepting of that change. The moment you have a diverse group of people, that means from different castes, who understand the system differently, at least the acceptance of an appeal or a change in decision would be more. And that is why they said that this is a real good advantage that the system has. And talking about the defects, he says that not understanding the intricacies of the case by the members of the panchayat also becomes a problem if they are not too willing to be on the panchayat. So sometimes it used to be where the people find it very difficult to get panchayat members. Why? Because they had to be attending it more often. So there were problems of attendance. Plus, they were not going to be paid anything for it. Right? So with these issues, there was a possibility that a certain member gets represented on the panchayat member who doesn't understand the case. But just because there wasn't anyone more willing to come in, they had to take that member. So solution, the Britishers thought that, should we do something? Should we find these people? Right? That you are actually more eligible to be on the panchayat member, but because you're refusing to be one, we will fine you. Because you're not being regular, you're not coming on time. We tried that, and the Shastri, that is the local officer who's in charge of justice, he went and told the collector of Pune, and he said that, sir, I don't think this is a good idea to continue with this fining system because it is unnecessarily going to make the system unpopular. So it is a good system, let's not go with that. We'd rather convince them to be more regular and attend it more regularly rather than fining them. Right? And one more problem that the panchayat system had was, especially for cases which were very complicated. Now, in those cases, when there is intricate circumstantial evidences that are there, you have to be more alert when you're giving justice. You have to be understanding that very well. And sometimes the panchayat members, just so that they don't need to come to a decision, would procrastinate. So they were delayed for no reason. Right? So that was a danger that they sometimes saw in some of the cases that they studied by the panchayat members. But there were no certain principles or rules. That was something which they felt was a major defect of this system. That there was nothing laid down. Like we have our coding system of the law, right? That okay, under this section, this particular IPC number, this is the crime that you have, and this is how you're going to be punished. But this was not something that was there in the panchayat system. No specific rules were laid down, no procedures were laid down. This was an understanding amongst the village members, amongst the community, that you choose the 5 respectable men, they are going to be unbiased, and whatever they say has to be followed. But in spite of these defects, the British felt that the Maratha country had flourished, and therefore we are very keen on retaining this democratic approach to justice. Of course, to achieve this, we will need to bring in certain reforms which will have all the germs of a democratic system, right? And they felt it was most suitable in settling the disputes in the rural areas than in any other ordinary court of justice we've ever had. And therefore, the British wanted to continue with this system of justice. Just to bring in a few opinions of the British officers, next slide. The collector of Pune, he stated, I quote, while giving justice to the people of the conquered territories, it was desirable to continue to them whatever was good in itself of their own customs. It was not to be superseded by what the British thought to be better in the European countries. Just see the British officers themselves telling the superiors this. But what we think is better back in our own land doesn't mean we implement that over here. He informed Elphinstone that the standard mode of the whole country was investigation by panchayat, and he was convinced that the panchayats gave good justice and believed that if their proceedings were regulated, its mode of giving justice was best adapted to the people. Next slide, please. Then we have Chapman, who comes in as the Denton Commissioner after Mount Stuart Elphinstone. So Mount Stuart Elphinstone was promoted and he went on to become the governor of Bombay, and William Chapman was appointed as the Deputy Commissioner. Remember about the European judge coming in and playing a role? This is what Chapman had to say. He said that if you have a European judge appointed, he is not going to understand the nuances. So he says a European judge should be given the authority to summon a jury. Let him call the jury, especially when intricate circumstantial evidences were involved. Let him supervise it, because these evidences would be better understood by the natives than the European judge himself. The judge, he was bound by the decision of the jury, even if he thought it otherwise. So a power which is in a way being taken away from a judge, one would wonder. That is the kind of faith they had in the panchayat system, right? And he says the jury should be given the freedom to form their own judgment without any instructions or influence from the judge. That very clearly shows how open they were to following this democratic system, because they believed in this. Right? And in spite of these defects, one realizes that the British concluded that yes, it was an informal institution. It did not have the features of all the formal instruments of justice that were required. The members debated the issue and then they came to a conclusion. So it was not dominated by any one particular person. Because it involved a number of members and the members belonged to the same village or the community of the disputants, the value system that the disputants and the members shared were the same. So it was more possible and easy for the Panchayat members to understand the disputants' problems, the issue at hand, and resolve it. And even because they were from the same village, the complainant would be more accepting of the decision being given because they were people from the respectable people of his own village. Right? And the execution powers, just to maintain this check system, was to be in the hands of the officers and not the panchayats. Because again, they felt that if it was given in the hands of the panchayats, they could take undue advantage of it. Right? And that is how it acted as a check on the panchayat members and prevented them from giving any biased decision or being corrupt in the process. Right? In this way, we see that the people's participation in this judicial branch of governance is clearly highlighted because it is taking all the people with you when you are giving justice, which is another very significant feature of democracy. Last slide. The fact that any 5 respectable members of the village could be taken on the panchayat highlights the democratic approach of the system. That it was a major institution for dispensing justice and was operating successfully is again clearly evident from the many reports, whether it is Chapman's report, whether it's Elphinstone's reports on the territories acquired, whether it is the collectors' reports that have been submitted as answers to all the detailed questions that were posted. It clearly shows that the participation of the people in dispensing justice appealed to them, and so they found the system to be a democratic approach to justice and hence to continue the same in Maharashtra. All that I have to say. Thank you. Yes, last. Really grateful to you all for such a patient listening. I know you all have your exams and you're still here. So thank you so much. Any questions?
These panchayats as we see today, so they were not essentially elected by people.
No, they were generally the most respectable people of the village, the elderly people who they thought were unbiased.
But unless panchayats are elected, how can they call them democratic?
Okay, now when you say democratic, now see, when you look at the elderly people in the village, it is obviously a group of people who come and believe certain people to be respectable. Right? So if you even take any community that we also belong to today, they're generally the people who are men of property, who have no interest in the case at hand. If you're going to have some selfish interest, you're automatically going
We
to
also have some panchayats there.
Well, that is a very debatable thing. Yes, we do have that. That in fact, I can tell you something. My opinion is that it is a misuse of the power and authority that you have got. And that is the result of these panchayats, the way I know it. If it was really continued in the democratic way it had really been established in, I don't see we would have had these panchayats today. In fact, I was also discussing this topic with an elderly member of my family who lives in a village near Nasik. And he got interested and he said, what are you going to give this lecture on? And I was telling him. And he tells me that, do you really think that the panchayats today are following what you are saying? He says, I see a major difference. So he's experienced the panchayat system in his own village. And he says, you know what is the major difference? He says the major difference is that the panchayat members in those days knew the case at hand, knew the people at hand, understood the evidences. Today's panchayat members are there just for their gains and just to be there to make as much as they can while being on that post or a position, you can call it. They are clueless about the person, they're clueless about the case, they're just there because they have to be there. That I think really tells us the deterioration of the system the way it has come in. It doesn't mean it is not successful in other places. But that is the real anomaly of this whole thing where we can say that yes, we have a good system. Now, whether to maintain that system and implement it in the right way is actually in our hands. Again, a responsibility on the people again. Yes.
I just stuck with this continuation of this democratic system.
Right.
But the Britishers, gave this kind of autonomy for their obvious reason that they didn't want to internalize the local people. But if you see in Madras, what happened in Madras, they gave representation to the caste which migrated to Fort George at that time. So those caste people, those who had migrated from different parts of Madras and the presidency. So they got representation in their municipality, which was then, and they said that they wanted to give them representation because after all they want. But out here, caste-wise, representation, when you talk about inclusiveness, is not seen in the Panchayat system out here. So if at all you would call it all inclusive, so in what sense you want it all inclusive? Because touchables and untouchable divide is there, and therefore Ambedkar said that villages and even this Panchayat system is the sink of localism. And it's a den of upper caste people. So and then you have a lot of and this was pushed to customary law. Most of it is customary. It's not criminal and not civil in that sense.
True.
And I think it is more transitory phase for some 3 or 4 decades maybe, when Lord Cornwallis came up with this judicial system, the new judicial system. So the period maybe very less, maybe 3 or 4 decades.
I'll tell you something, more than the period being less, the region was different.
Yeah.
So you have Mountstuart Elphinstone stating in very clear terms, telling his home government that I will not follow the British system that is going back in the country. And secondly, Cornwallis's judicial settlement is not appropriate for this region. And therefore, I am not going to follow it. Because he realized Cornwallis's judicial system was again having a lot of features of the English system of justice. And therefore, he was able to take the stand that if you're giving me this autonomous body to rule and ensure that the people accept our rule over here, I am not going to follow the Cornwallis's judicial system. And the British government, the home government that they had to accept it and gave him a free hand to take this judicial settlement of this territory the way he thought it best for the people. So I think that speaks a lot about the fact that the people of this region and the system that we had must have been something really strong for a British officer to go against his own government and make a statement based on evidence.
But that was for obvious reason. You could say to this or to the queen that we should not disturb this relation.
But it's not that. Now that I'm focusing on Panchayat system, that was not the only system of justice that they were following. They had brought in their kacheris. We have the formal courts over here. We have the entire structure in place, which they brought. But they wanted to, when they looked at the rural setup, they realized the Panchayat system is best for them. So it wasn't they could have antagonized the urban group of people as well by doing this, by bringing in the new courts and systems.
It didn't empower the marginalized.
I would rather say we all were marginalized against the British. In
what
that
they-
sense,
but
I don't think we were anywhere with them.
But
So
it had a
whether it was
structure.
the higher caste people or the lower caste people or the
But it had a structure, though it was a marginalized. There were layers of marginalized. And you have historic marginalization of the untouchable group.
That was there, no doubt, because they were under our own rulers as well.
But if you
Again,
like
so
to-
there was a system in place for giving justice to them as well. That's what I said.
I would, qualify.
Yes, of course it
Because,
can.
Ambedkar question in the Maharavatanam bill, when he presented that how British system is more biased in terms of the Bombay Hereditary Officers Act,
Mhm.
and they abolished, Kulkarni Vatan and Party Vatan. They never abolished Maharavatanam.
Mhm.
So he was very quite critical of the British. And
I think I need to read out more.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a related. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. So related to that, I mean, we see that is, I think, if you include that in the presentation, that there was a parallel system of justice that the court and treasuries were also brought in, that gives a background, and that also helps to appreciate the efforts of Elphinstone. When we as your lecture proceeds. So my question was related to that only. So was it only Elphinstone, or were there so many Elphinstones in the country who were trying to retain the indigenous system of courts or whatever system of justice was there? So because I was just thinking, it's not just their economic interest, in the sense mentally status quo can be in their economic interest, because then you get rid of riots and all these things which save you so much cost, right? But then it seems to be a peculiar case, not the general case, pan India. But so are there more peculiar cases? I was just curious about that.
So yes, there are. For this, I'm going to give you homework on your exams and that.
Yeah.
Which is one, you can read this book, which is very much in our Gokhale Institute library, which will give you a detailed system of the judicial administration that was brought in this region of Maharashtra, and especially now. And to answer your second question, whether there were such parallels, the monograph picture that I showed that is recently being published by ICHR, in that Dr. Meenakshi Jain has written a paper in which he is talking about how these early administrators. So if you were to draw parallels, yes, we find that in amongst the early British administrators who came in, who are more than willing to look at the system the way it is, whether it was the judiciary or the administration, and keep the best of what was already existing and then bring in things to make it better. So yes, across the country you can find examples.
Yeah, and I just had at the very beginning of the presentation, there was this statement that Maratha rulers, including Peshwas, had maintained the independence. So I was just thinking, I did not get that idea.
Okay.
I mean, it is not related to your main theme, but
That's just the background.
yeah.
But still, okay, so what do you want from that? You tell me.
Yeah. So in what context we are saying that they maintained the independence?
Okay. And you have a background of history, if you remember whatever you must have studied earlier. The entire country, when you look at, you had the Mughal rulers. Down south, you had the Nizam, the Adil Shahis, right? The British, when they came in, they're taking over one by one all of these. And here in the west, you have the Marathas, right? Now, when the Peshwas are there, when the Peshwas come in also, so it was not only with the end of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj that the Swarajya ended. It was continued by his prime ministers, right? And in that sense, they fought till the very last and did not surrender to any of these, we can call each of them the foreign rulers. And
So,
in that
but
sense,
in that
they
sense-
retained the Swarajya.
But can we call the Muslim rulers foreigners?
Well, they were technically.
Oh.
Technically, if you really
Yeah,
go
but
back,
over the because see this as I understand, their rule was not just 50 years or 100 years. So then where do we draw a line? Till what point they be foreigners in their rule in the country they are ruling?
right,
So that I think is tricky.
yes.
But I don't know how historians deal with that.
It's a political question. Critical question to ask.
Well, yes, but I'm just trying to be as
It's fine.
safe as possible. Now, of course, it's a thing of perspective.
Right.
At what point do you treat the Mughal rulers or the other Chai rulers or the Nilam Chai rulers as foreigners? And at what time would you then start looking at the Europeans as foreigners and then the medieval rulers as your own because they've been here for a longer time?
Right. We have Europeans still staying in India.
Yes.
So are they technically foreigners today for us? Foreign the same concept or the definition?
Technically, yes. So, but they're not referred to as the Firangis. So, who are your Firangis and all your Europeans who come into
Yeah,
that?
I mean, it depends on the definition of how we define foreigner. If they have citizenship, I mean,
No. So, I'll tell you what. The major distinction, what I tell my students also, is if you want to, what is the difference between the Mughal rule or the medieval rulers and the British rule? Is that the Mughal rulers, whether it was even the earlier dynasty, the Sultanate rulers, they all came and settled here. They kind of, whatever they gained as revenue from here was used up to a large extent, barring a few rulers. When it comes to the Europeans, when it comes to the British, that is something that they never did. They came here, they were always appointed as officers on deputation in this land. Whatever they earned out of it, it was taken back. So the Gandhi's theory of getting, like acting like a sponge, the drainware theory, all of that then comes in. That they did not use all of that money in the development of this land for everything. So that is where you see a major distinction, I feel, between the earlier rulers and then terming them as foreign rulers. Because they did not make this land their own in any way, which you can see the medieval Indian rulers having made it. So I think that is where one can really distinguish the term of treating the Europeans as foreign rulers and not.
One can, also, think in a way that how the culture, the culture of society has become more synthetic in terms of give and take, and it is because of the presence of different religious traditions that existed. So, for example, if you see Marathi terminologies, like Kasba is a very Marathi term, whiskey, but it is actual Persian.
Right.
Yeah, it comes from these Mughal rulers. And Dawakhana is not a Marathi term. It is a Persian term. So there is no parallel term in Marathi literature for most of the administration. And even Shivaji has borrowed most of the terminologies. It is from the Mughal kind of administration. And Todarmal's land revenue system, all see even Diwan.
So in fact, the term Mahasar that I used is also from there. So definitely, so in fact, culturally, if we go to study this time period, you will.
How can we dissociate that,
Culturally, it's very difficult to dissociate them because that is the response I think that we've given to all the invasions that we've had over a period of time. So culturally, we've imbibed a lot of it, no doubt about it. So even our Urdu that is there, it is primarily so popular in the northern region. A lot of interest by the youth today. It's definitely there. Culturally, it's very difficult to distinguish and say, oh, this was an influence that did not happen on our land.
And we have internalized it so much, Kasiba, Mause, they are all Persian.
Yeah. That's
So, the difference that we see in Hyderabad and Zundari areas, is there any different panchayats under Vishwas, Maratha, basically?
under the Mughals? Okay. That is not something that I've really studied in detail for me to, authentically tell you on that. But when we look at the medieval period, whatever judiciary that I've seen, we don't see too much of the panchayat system being used primarily. They had a different system of administration where the Mughal officers played a very important role. Because for them, it was the control of these officers which mattered for them to govern that region.
But here also, when you're saying Maharashtra, it is not exactly Maharashtra. Our empire was not as far as part of that.
No, what I'm talking about, sir, is the Deccan Commissionerate region,
Yeah.
which involves what is by and large of the whole of Maharashtra that is
So
true.
southern Maharashtra, some areas must have been in Nadi. So is there any distinction there?
When we look at, I don't know of any comparative study being made that way, but the Panchayat systems code has always been this. And anywhere in the country, you see this is the code that is being.
So same way, or even if there were tests.
Hmm.
So it was not necessarily, was there any tier kind of system that you're saying that Shastri used to take those cases, appeal cases to the High Court? Was there a mid-level between the collector and the judge?
No, in fact, it was the Shastri who helped the collector in giving justice. So again, if you look at the entire judiciary system in this book, we have clear evidences to show that the collector never made any decision on his own. So even when it was Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, he never gave a decision alone. It was always in an open court with other members in it who were willing to participate and understood the entire case that was at hand. So even when the Britishers came in, the local Shastri was always there because they believed he's the authority on the Shastras, based on which the judgment has to be given. So he was not a mediator really, but he was the one with them to give justice to them. He was more like a part of the system.
The system is structured. Hardly any cases would have been estimated that way.
So, in fact, because it was speedy, in fact, there were cases. So more than 50 to 60% were there solved by the panchayats. We have a clear, what should I say, a structure, feature wherein how many cases came in, how many cases were solved by the panchayat, how many actually went to the court, how many were rejected, how many appeals were made. We have this detailed analysis that has been made and the numbers with us for this entire region of the region. So in that, yes. So I have to talk the Pune Collectorate primarily. So there are books again. I'm coming back to Gokhale Institute. Really feels an honor for me because I have been here. I don't know how many of you all have even been to the rare book section of your esteemed library. And yes, and that extended wing that used to be there, very quiet, hardly anyone. And the moment there are Sevaks used to be there, like Mahape used to look. कि कौन आया है who wants to go to the rare book section. So I think it's a way of giving back. It is all here. So whether if you want to even read of the other collectorates, their books also are here. So you have one on Pottinger, you have one on Briggs.
I have been there.
Oh wow, so you understand what I'm trying to say. It's really fun. So yes, your library is a red hub. Yes.
So these 5 panchayat heads were men, right? So were there any cases of injustices towards this?
No, because when the Britishers come in, for them the equality was always very important. So we do not see cases where injustices being done to the women were clearly evident, and still the Britishers have gone ahead with it, saying that because it's a panchayat decision, we are not going against. Yes.
Do you think that it was only the system and the Britishers? That is why the system was so sophisticated. That is why everything was so massive that we cannot attain that thing.
I think it's more the people. I think it's more us. More than the system. The systems are always there. It is us who make or break our system. So I think the people understood the responsibility that was bestowed on them at that time. It was not something which was taken very casually. So I don't think it is the people who are overlooking it, so it is neither the Britishers nor the system. It is us side. That's how I look.
I would like to take what she has said.
Mhm.
Is that we have woman Chakravarti's role on Peshwas, and then how was very discriminatory in terms when it comes to class, caste, class, and gender.
Yeah.
So she has got these evidences that how even Peshwas and their Farmans were discriminatory to even Brahmin women. When Peshwas gave these commands of marrying their daughters before the age of puberty. And it gave a command to identify whether how many men from administration, Brahmin men from administration have girls beyond this age, and they were to be outcast. Such formats. I mean, she has in her work, documented all those things, and then how law even was discriminatory and biased in terms of women, and even Brahmin women. Forget about other caste women, but even Brahmin women. So she has given you these kind of evidences, but therefore, it would not be appropriate to say that it was more panchayats were more gender friendly or gender neutral or just to gender.
I would rather say during the British, from whatever records we have found, there was no appeal being made against such a decision where women were involved in the
That doesn't mean that there is discrimination.
No, I'm not saying that.
Process.
Definitely, the fact that Chakravarti man has actually brought these out, definitely they would exist. And but the way I look at it is that has been the system for so many years. And it definitely, therefore, you will find such examples everywhere because that is how the society was. So I don't think any system is going to be averse to having any examples being against women anywhere. It's just that now we've become really more conscious in understanding that yes, women have to be treated equally, and that is where these studies are gaining importance, and it's high time they gain importance. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. I take this opportunity again to thank each one of you. So thank you for